Welcome, everybody. Welcome to VCIG Live. We're very excited to have you participating with us today in our session on interoperability. It's a fantastic topic, and we have some fantastic panelists for you, and we anticipate a very, very lively debate. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping issues, if you will, and then we'll get started with today's panel. My name is Carl Dahlin, and I'm a member of the VCI Group Advisory Board. A little bit about the VCI Group. We are an organization of end user and vendor members. And our mission is basically to make users the voice of end users in the video collaboration industry. So users are the ones that are using these products. It's very important that they're heard. So we are making sure that we are the voice of the end users in the VC industry. Our vision is that you can use visual collaboration on any device, anywhere, anytime, with any vendor. So that's what we're striving to get to, and today's topic of interoperability is certainly key to that. For those of you that have questions during this event, you're able to tweet those. So use the hashtag VCIGLive, VCIGLive, and we'll try and get as many of those questions worked into the session as possible. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our vendor partners who are working hard on interoperability and certainly make these kinds of events and everything we do possible. So I'd like to start by thanking Zoom, who is not only one of our partners, but hosting us on this call today. It's a fantastic application for video. I encourage you to check it out. I'd also like to thank our VCI Group Alliance members, of which we have many. So if your company is not listed among these and you are a vendor member, please contact us after the event, and we look forward to discussing it with you. I'd especially like to thank our VCI Group Circle of Leaders. They go above and beyond in supporting this event and other events, and in particular Cisco Systems, who is not only a fantastic Circle of Leader member, but has representation on the panel here today. So again, we look forward to a very exciting session on interoperability. With that, I'm going to turn this over to your host and moderator, my friend and colleague, Mr. J.D. Vaughn. J.D.?
No. Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Welcome. Today we're talking about the cost of interoperability. And before we go, I just want to say, Carl, I love your use of the word fantastic. If I got $100 every time you said it to this, then I'd have $1 million already. Everything's fantastic to Carl, and it should be. He's with a great new firm, iRobot. Let's talk a bit about our panelists. By the way, we're not going to go through all these bios. You can see them on our website, VCIG group.org. Go there and find out a little bit about Tom Doria. One thing you'll notice, he's got 3 decades in the industry. Go over and talk to Joe. Joe's down in Houston. He's at Chevron. He's been in the industry 14 years. You can see his brief profile in the on the website as well. Adam Marlin at Pexip. He's the EVP for all of Pexip North America. He too has been in the business some time. And now last but certainly not least, Ira Weinstein of Wayne House, and I was talking to Ira earlier today. I even knew Ira before he was married, and that seemed like years ago. By the way, these folks, if we add it all up, somewhere north of 65 or 70 years in this industry. So there's some folks here with experience. What we're going to talk about today, if we move over, and I'm going to ask Carl if he'll move us over to slide number 13, if he would. We're going to answer the question, what is interop? And for that, I'd like to ask, before we can answer that question, what is it? What is it? And why is it important? Ira, you want to take it on for us?
Sure, that's fine. There are 2 parts to this. First, there's technically speaking, what is interop? And that's technically, it's the ability to make different systems work together. But to me, that's kind of vague, and it doesn't really tie into our industry well. I view interop in our industry as letting people and companies communicate no matter what vendor's technology they've purchased, no matter which device they're using, whether they're in a meeting room, at their PC, on a mobile device, office, road, home. It doesn't matter what network they're on. So to me, it doesn't matter what they're doing or where they're doing it. They can participate without worrying about interop or the ability to connect. When you achieve that, meaning I dial you and we connect, we've achieved interop, and that's what interop is.
Do you think that's a reasonable expectation given the marketplace and the technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. Realistically, true interop can never be achieved. And you know, a lot of people, you know, especially vendors, dislike when I say that, but the reality is the only way to achieve ongoing interop is to stop all innovation. Because the moment one vendor or one service provider comes out with a new feature, a new function, a new capability, we lose interop until all the other vendors catch up. So for example, there's a lot of talk today about H.265, a more efficient protocol for bandwidth. Well, right now, very few vendors support that. So those vendors that do support it could not interoperate at using H.265 with other vendors. So the net is, as long as the solutions grow and become more powerful, we're going to have interop issues, and realistically, we better. Otherwise, we're not growing.
Got it. Well, Joe Barron, as a user, what is it to you?
I will really describe, I think very well summed it up. From a user's perspective, I want to be able to walk in my room or use my device, whatever I'm doing, and place a call to whomever I want with quality. That's the other thing I would add is we you know, the users expect, they're at home watching their HD TVs. Well, darn it, when I place this call and I've got a video and we hear so much that term HD in the industry all the time, I want that same type of quality every time when I use my device.
So that's the kind of expectation the users at Chevron have of you, and direct their questions and or issues to your department, your organization.
I hear it often. Why can I at home get this kind of quality that I can't hear? And you've got to go into the technical explanation as best you can, that at home, what you're seeing at home is a one-way delivery. What we're trying to achieve here is two-way, and that adds a whole nother realm to the discussion.
It certainly does. And what is it to vendors, Adam? What is interop to vendors? Adam, you might be on mute.
Yep, the first thing you have to do is learn how to unmute quickly. So that's the most important thing around interop.
Well, you know what? At Stanford, we would just agree that you went to University of California. That's your problem.
I wish I went to University of California. That would have been a terrific experience.
But why is it a problem? I mean, what is it? What is it to you, Tom? I want you to get prepared to say why is it a problem. But Adam, what is it to vendors?
Yeah, you know, I'll just take one step back and say I think part of the challenge that customers are having is that they're unclear as to what tool to use for what job, and they don't want to have to think about it and understand it, right? And at the end of the day, you know, the market is converging between what were legacy disparate tools, right? What is a web conference? What is a video conference? What is an audio conference? To the point made earlier, I want to be able to connect, but I need to be able to connect with the fullest experience possible from the client I happen to be using. Right, that means voice, it means video, it means content. And I think today we've really put it on the employee in the organization, right, to fix it, or what I would call human middleware, right? You know, the end user has to figure it out, or then call IT and say, hey, help me, it's broken. And I think interop to vendors means different things, right? All of us try to market our solutions to the best extent possible, but everyone has a different, you know, objective at the end of the day, right? Those vendors that have a end-to-end solution are always going to be oriented towards innovating towards that end-to-end solution and having that deliver a maximum experience, right? And then the vendors are always going to struggle because new protocols emerge, new standards emerge. There is no Uber architecture, to Ira's point, that's going to solve all of these problems in perpetuity. And even within architectures, things change, right? If I could borrow from my Cisco days, you know, there was 3 clients that became Jabber, right? There was a great web client, a great chat client, a voice client, a video client. Those came together to a great Jabber solution there is today. But that took time. That was an evolution. Take Microsoft Lync, right? That was an RTV client, and now it's an SVC client because protocols change, standards emerge, and we want to take advantage of all of the benefits of those tools. And so I think from a vendor standpoint, sorry, long answer. I think, you know, everybody is trying to figure out a way to maximize the user experience with the portfolio they have.
Okay, so everybody's trying to maximize the user experience. Everybody's trying to innovate to make their company better. Everybody's trying to do that, and all the while, we're going to leave the consumer in charge of connections. Boy, sounds like a problem to me. Is that a problem, Tom?
You know, I would say it's a problem, and I'm going to start sort of the debate here and challenge Ira's comments that innovation you know, is limited or restricted if you if you work within standards. So why is it a problem? I would suggest that there are standards that many of the vendors adhere to today, and there are the vendors that have taken liberty with those standards and taken parts of those standards and implemented in as their strategy to keep their products unique and to attract customers. Those kinds of innovations, although I think for many customers appear to be appealing, they really lock a customer into a single vendor's sole source point of view, and they lose the advantages that come from the community of work that takes place in these standards development organizations and the innovations that do come out of that. I would suggest that innovation isn't restricted to one company. Indeed, much to the other side of the coin in Ira's argument, I would say true innovation really comes in these standards development organizations that have resolved the problems of interoperability and many other technologies. To Adam's point, these evolutions take time, but we're already seeing that evolve in the industry. To the comment that was made with regard to Microsoft, we've seen Microsoft take a step out of the world of proprietary technologies and dip their feet into the world of standards-based technologies for video. And I would suggest dip is the right term. They haven't made a full move there yet, but they're making that move slowly. And the pressure that all the folks that are listening in on this call bring to the table are really driving all of us manufacturers to move in that general direction.
Well, Ira, Tom just said you were wrong.
I want to jump in on that puppy there. So just to be clear, you're saying that I said innovation is limited if you work within standards. I think it's the opposite. I think by definition, as we add more power, more innovation to our solutions, we are stretching the boundaries of those standards, defining new standards. But unfortunately, until others catch up and support that new angle, that new profile, that new protocol, we have an interop problem. So my view is we need to have interop problems in order to improve the experience. So it's not something we can solve by just saying, let's all interop. It just isn't something you can just declare is now solved.
Well, you know what it is though, and we can talk about this as we go through. If you can look at the anomalies between standards and innovation, for a lot of us in the industry over 30 years, that looks like profitability and opportunity. That looks like wherever you can fill those voids. Historically, that's where innovative young companies have made their mark. But tell me, Ira, is it achievable? Is real? You said it earlier. Is some level? Can we say that some level of interop is achievable? We can all agree to work at that level. If we wanted something else, we can add that later. We can add that to special groups.
Absolutely. I mean, the way most of our technology and, quite frankly, most of our calls work today is with some degree of compromise. Right? We all agree, all of our solutions, they negotiate some acceptable level of interworking or interoperability. And what that means is that we may not have access to the most efficient protocol or every feature or every function, but we can communicate. So that's a compromise that we make in favor of communicating. But, as Tom was saying, when you stick with one vendor solution, you may get those features. When you interoperate, you may lose some of them, but you are communicating. That's what matters here.
Can I pose a question here?
Sure.
So you mentioned some level, and I agree with that. I do think I think you can't get total interop, but I think you can get some level. But here's my question. So when we make that technology innovation, do we then lose our interop? Do we lose that level of interop that we achieved? We reach a point, then a new innovation comes out, and do we have to start all over? Because we're waiting for other companies to get that same type of level.
Well, my view, if I can toss that in there, is that it's not that you're losing interop, it's just you don't have access to this power feature until everybody else starts to support it. So we can't interoperate at that level, but we can interoperate where we've been. It's very rare that vendors actually remove their baseline interop, right? It's a matter of when I move forward, how long does it take until others follow suit and we can interoperate on that level? That's different.
I would agree with Ira. I think that really speaks to the power of the bigger manufacturers. And I'll take my Cisco hat off for a second and just say across the board, the larger manufacturers, much to Ira's point, don't abandon older Kodak technologies when they introduce new Kodak technologies. I think that's breathed life and will continue to breathe life into interworking MCUs and gateways for a while. My point is that even within the standards that are emerging, there are companies that have taken liberties and only implemented components of the standards. I think scalable video coding is an excellent example there. As you look across the players in the industry that have implemented that technology, you see a standard that was defined within the IETF and the ITU team communities that have been taken liberties with, some vendors implementing part of the standard, some implementing all of the standard, none of them interoperating with each other. And we start to see emerge what I would call de facto standards coming into play in the industry. Companies like Microsoft, Polycom, Cisco, Lifesize are starting to solidify around a de facto standard that all of them have agreed to, either through customer pressure or through the desire to satisfy interoperability across the products and penetrate the market further. But those gravities of force are really being driven by the user communities. And
so what I hear you.
So Tom, I have a comment on that, and I agree with that to some extent, right? But at the end of the day, there are new things that are emerging, and it's the commercial impact of those new technologies that are typically the limiting factor, right? The innovator's dilemma for the incumbents. And I'll pick on Microsoft for a moment. If you look at WebRTC, right, what a great potential innovation for our industry, so that everybody could participate in a high-quality experience right from their browser without a plugin, right? That should be something that everybody wants to adopt. Now, Microsoft, I think in their particular case, are hesitating to do that predominantly for commercial reasons, right? And you might take that same approach and that same outlook even into Apple's world, right? And things like FaceTime. So when we look at, the evolution of standards, I don't think it's the large manufacturers' adherence to legacy and supporting those older codecs, to use your example. I don't think that's the issue. It's how fast can the industry evolve to take advantage of a new innovation or a new way of doing things. I mean, the nice thing about what Microsoft has done in supporting their iteration of SVC is at least it's published, right? At least you can write to it. And that creates the environment, like you mentioned, of a de facto standard, but at least it's out there.
Yeah,
So what I'm hearing so far, gentlemen, is this. Here's what I'm hearing. Tell me if so Ira, what you've said is there will never be true 100% interoperability because companies are innovating. We've got developers out there creating new stuff. We all have to settle for some layer or level of ability to communicate at a reduced feature set, reduced kind of whiz bangs. But we're willing to do that so we can all communicate. And then do we enjoy some sort of ubiquity like that now? I mean, do we have a level of interoperability across the board with most manufacturers is reasonable?
Yeah, so I can give you my view on this. Over the years, and it's the right thing to happen, we've watched that, let's call it baseline interoperability, improve over time, right? Years ago, it was H.261, I got a connection, I can hear them. Then it became a better protocol, higher resolution, better audio. And today, between vendors, even if we're on some sort of basic interop, you can get an amazing experience. You're talking HD resolution, wideband audio, and you didn't do anything to make that happen. What you lose are the vendor-specific bells and whistles, some great functions and features that the vendors have brought in that differentiate their offering. Very often those go. But we have a degree of, I can call you, don't worry about it, it'll be a great call interop already today. It's pretty strong.
Cool.
I would agree. I mean, you look at the codec that we're using today to even communicate on this medium, it's 10 years old. H.264 ABC was defined over 10 years ago. H.265 now just coming into market as its next generational replacement will take time for broad industry adoption. Does that mean users have to wait 10 years before they use it? My answer would be no. There's the ability to do hybrid solutions that intermix and allow endpoints that are capable of using that codec to work with endpoints that are using older codec technologies, so you get the best of both worlds.
Well, I would simply say in my economics class, I would simply say, welcome to capitalism. Welcome to that's what it's about, right?
Hey, JD.
Yes, sir.
Just real quick. So we've the last few minutes we've talked real technical. I would say so. Let me bring this back to a user perspective. I can tell you that, I mean, users don't care about 264 and they don't care about 265. They want to place that call. They want it to go through each time. And they're so driven by media and what they see on TV daily. I mean, how many times have we probably all gotten, I saw them having this meeting in the cab on their iPad. When can we do that?
Exactly.
That's what they think interop is.
You're right. No, I agree with you. The users have a different expectation, and we've talked about on other previous VCIGs that it's incumbent upon our managers of the technical solutions, the collaboration solutions, to set the expectations appropriately on a regular basis. Let's move over to the next slide here, because this is a great debate, but let's talk about what it costs. Over slide 14, if we could, Carl. So, Adam, what does it cost to make this, from a number perspective, what does it take for a user to make interop happen? What does it take for a vendor, too? I mean, why would a vendor want to do that? I can understand how perhaps video, they landed on their own 264, and they've been selling that and doing a good job of it for some time. Others take another perspective. We listened to Tom talk about people creating items. What does it cost to make it happen for the end user and for vendors? Want to talk to that a little bit, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's two very different questions. What does it cost for the user, and what does it cost for a vendor? Every vendor has their own portfolio that they have to rationalize around, and their own challenges with the legacy portfolio and their own pace of innovation. From a customer, it really depends on what their objectives are and what their installed base is. Right. I think increasingly the lesson learned that we hear all the time from customers is, I can't give you a 3 or 5 year outlook like I used to, 5 years ago. Right. I can't tell you what I'm going to use. I might move to Link. I might move to Jabber. I might move to Google Apps. I don't know. Right. So the answer to that is to find a highly interoperable and, to Joe's point, very simple way for users to make those calls, whether that's point to point or whether that's a multi-party, type of collaboration, to bring in the tools that they want, meaning mobile devices, desktop PCs, room-based video conferencing, audio, web, content, mobility, and deliver that in a model that is inexpensive, that is OpEx in orientation. That doesn't necessarily mean cloud, right? You can get subscription services on the premise, but that gives customers flexibility to say, hey, I want to try this and see if it'll fix my problem for now. And if 2 years from now my problem changes or I go in a different direction, then I don't have to continue with that subscription service anymore. And we think that that's what we hear most frequently from customers, right? Help me with my problem today, make it blind to the end user, and give me the flexibility to change my mind, right? And you certainly have that option and opportunity in the consumer world, and I think that's becoming pervasive, in the commercial world as well.
Well, we're continuing to see growth in the immersive space with immersive hardware products, not necessarily just the codecs, but what about organizations that are willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to create that kind of environment, only to have it degraded by some guy that's on a bring your own device kind of thing? I mean, is it appropriate to have different kinds of expectations, different kinds of experiences, or does everybody that has a device have the right to say I get access?
Yeah,
I'm going to raise my hand on that one and suggest that, to Joe's point, it should be any pane of glass. I mean, we hear that from our customers, our folks even internally. Good solutions, interoperability, aside from the codecs they use, should be deliverable on any pane of glass, and that the user experience should be common across it, not just the user experience, but the user UI. So when we work within Cisco to deliver that kind of strategy, we keep those mindsets in line of our development efforts, because customers at the end of the day, like Joe and his organization and many others, are demanding that we want to have the ability to collaborate wherever we are on whatever medium we're using, whether it be web-based, whether it be mobile-based, whether it be iPad or Android-based or Windows-based. And good technology companies direct their efforts to address those problems.
So
I would only challenge one thing there, and that is, certainly, we can enable anybody to connect into an immersive call, right? That could be Link, a WebRTC, whatever, right? And I think you asked an interesting question, which is, one about, well, what is my network connectivity? Should I even be allowed to join? But I think as I look in the market, the one challenge I would have is I don't see the growth, and Tom, feel free to challenge me. I don't see the growth in the immersive market. I don't see customers adding more immersive. I certainly see some people replacing their legacy with new ones, but we see the explosive growth of the desktop, right? Huge projects around Jabber, huge projects around Link. How do I get the visual experience to everybody? And I think in the customer's mind, and I'd love to hear Joe's opinion, that's a way for them to take the whole user objection off the table around what tool. Let me just start with whatever desktop client is my corporate standard. And maybe that will simplify it for the end user. And then if I can extract away the interoperability challenge, then maybe it's a win.
Yeah. So let me just quickly respond to Adam, and then certainly I want to hear Joe's thoughts as well. With respect to immersives, I think the industry's spoken on what classically was defined as an immersive, these $250,000 to $500,000 systems. I would suggest the industry's redefining immersive. The concept of a collaboration room where large glass or different kinds of mediums are being used to create that same sort of immersive experience at a much lower cost is becoming the new trend in the industry. So I don't think immersion is going away. I think the costs surrounding creating it, these exclusive, Ferrari costing systems are going away. And we most definitely are looking at that and addressing that with the technology we develop at Cisco.
JD, if I can jump in for a sec, I love the concept of, the industry is redefining immersive, but really I think the vendors are redefining immersive because they need to highlight and maximize the value of what they're offering. I mean, I hate to say it, but the term immersive means nothing to most people anymore. It's high quality visual collaboration. I love it. And whether you call it, I had a vendor years ago tell me about his immersive wristwatch because the quality is superb. It's an immersive experience on his watch. So I think we're hitting on a lot of the right points, but there was something strange that came up before. And, Adam brought it up. He was saying that interop is about the connection, but also about an all OpEx solution. And I guess I jammed the brakes on there. I don't know that how I pay for something or how I sell it has anything to do with connectivity. There are great cloud services that happen to be OpEx that can help me solve that. But I don't know that the definition of achieving OpEx is selling it on a monthly basis. I think we kind of jumped into business planning instead of, interop.
Yeah, the point there, Ira, was around flexibility, right? And that when people are looking at interop changes all the time. But that's a whole nature discussion we're having, right? So people don't want to get locked into a position, right? And that is a consumption model. You're absolutely correct. But that is a potential way for customers to solve the challenge.
Absolutely. I agree with 100%. The OpEx model makes it consumable and therefore, accessible, and we can enjoy that interop without spending tons of money on heavy iron, right? I love that. Right. But I guess I wanted to clarify that the business model is not necessarily an interop discussion. It's an achieving interop at some point in the business.
But he does make a point, Ira. I mean, remember 10 years ago when people made 5-year decisions, right? I mean, you make a 5-year decision now, you're way behind the 8 ball. I mean, you can't do that. And you had to do that so you could write it off then. So Adam, we talked a little bit about what does it cost to make it happen. Joe, to speak to me a little bit about those both questions as a user. If you don't have interop working across the board, what does that mean to Chevron? What does that mean to
us,
in your constituency?
We kind of look at interop from a perspective, internal, external. Our idea is what does my Chevron person in Angola trying to connect to my Chevron person in San Ramon, what are their challenges? What can I do to make that as smooth and as same that if they were to switch, they wouldn't have issues. They'd go into the same room and have the same experience. That's our goal, and that's what we move forward on. That's what we try to focus on. We're trying to solve a Chevron problem, but we also understand it's not just Chevron. We're talking outside our organization as many organizations do every day. So we understand that is there, and we need to make sure that we can have that. But I would say that's probably not. We spend a lot of time. At least my particular. And there's a few groups that work on this at Chevron, and the group I'm in is really kind of internally focused. And we actually do have a group that is where we work together, but they're externally focused.
Well, if you're focused on,
I can tell you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I can tell you that a lot of time we spend is on making sure that our interop internally is set to go, is good to go, and that we're moving forward.
So let's go to that third question then. What moves forward? So if we're trying to create interop, what moves forward? What gets left behind? I mean, if we're going to accept a standard that doesn't include certain kinds of capabilities, certain kinds of experiences, I mean, do we just say, well, I'll keep this at a C level, but for internally here within Chevron, we'll make it an A level? I mean, what moves forward? What gets left behind, Joe?
For right, and it changes. It's obviously it's part of the innovation. So it's interesting. The industry has its innovation, and then we as an organization almost have our own innovation that we have to. We don't want to be on the bleeding edge. I know it's a popular term. We want consistency and quality. And that's what we're trying to, and I know those are generalized terms, but that's what we're moving forward with. All of the bleeding edge, it's not that it's left behind. I hate the idea that we're saying left behind. It's not left behind. We are considering it because users are driving for it. They're asking for these capabilities. But at the end of the day, point A needs to connect to point B with quality, consistency of the very basic level of video, audio, and share. When we're adding in, we're starting to move into our additional bridgings of audio bridging and mobility devices. They're not left behind, but they're, if I have to choose those two categories, they're not moving forward either. What's moving forward is the consistency and the standardization of what we're trying to deploy internally, and I'm going to change that. I'm not going to say left behind. What's getting addressed in future and looking forward are the other items, are the mobility, are the additional audio bridging capabilities, things of that nature.
Well, let me segue that over to Ira a second. He's the guy that talked about innovation. So Ira, if I lock on, grab hold of interop as a primary issue, like grim death to a kitten, do I leave behind innovation? Do I leave because I'm not on the bleeding edge? Do I leave that behind?
Well,
is that the tough balance?
I think the answer is you have to ensure accessibility, reliability, and performance for the calls you do every day and the people you talk to, right? And all of us have a responsibility to maintain a certain level of technology capability so we can interop. I can't use a cell phone from 22 years ago or 20 years ago or 15 years ago, if they existed, because it wouldn't interoperate today. It wouldn't talk to the network. So I have a job to do is to make sure I can interoperate. When you've got new features and functions, they're not interesting until the people you need to communicate with can access them and use them, and you can still communicate. And I want to go back to Adam's point before. His point was spot on about making interop accessible, reachable, cost-effective, deployable, avoiding technology obsolescence and doing it. That's how we achieve interop. We achieve interop by pushing that envelope with technology and then making the ability to interop with it affordable and reachable.
I remember, this is going to set me back. I remember the first standards-based MCU. I was with that company called Video Server. And we sold a lot of those because we were the first device. And I can remember getting calls from end users saying, hey, it's not working on this particular thing. And I would say, absolutely, I'd say, hey, you're on the bleeding edge. You expected it to work all the time? I mean, and you could just, the pregnant pause on the other end of that line was just palpable because they did. They had an expectation because they were communicating. They had an expectation that, yes, it would work all the time. But I dissuaded them of that very quickly. Can we go to the next slide, please, Carl? Who's going to solve the problem? Who's going to make this? Who's going to make this work for us? Ira, who should solve it?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Like I said before, I don't think we can ever actually solve the interop problem and consider it done and sort of check it off on the list. I think we can make iterative steps to add more to our common interoperability as we innovate, and that's great. But I think the first responsibility starts at the end users. And I love the angle we were at before that Joe said, we expect it to work. So Joe's expectation is interoperability is built in. You must give me the ability to interoperate. So Joe has to take that need, that tenet behind the technology, and he has to vote with his dollars. He's got to vote with his dollars and say, vendors, I need you guys to solve this for me. And that's a technology discussion, and a consumption model discussion, because if you don't solve it, I won't buy it and I won't use it. So it starts with the end user, and then it goes to the vendor who wants to thrive and stay in business and profit, and they have to solve it. That's kind of my view, JD.
Well, what about, we kind of think it's our responsibility at VCIG to address that as well. Carl, are you still on the call, or you just moved slides, bud?
No, I'm still here, JD.
What about VCIG and other organizations like that? Do you think it's our responsibility to help address the problem? I mean, certainly we're addressing it here at the VC Directions. You want to weigh in there a little?
It's certainly up to us as somebody that becomes an important aggregator of what end users think. So in a lot of cases, you have small companies, SMBs drive the majority of video going on today, and they don't have the wherewithal to get some of these large vendors to move or do some of the things they need to do. So, we try and aggregate the needs of all of the vendors and then set a priority list that then we can take to big manufacturers like the Ciscos and Polycoms of the world, if you will, and say, hey, this is what our members are saying. This is what the end user customers like Chevron really want. These are their top 10 issues. Can you please help us address these interop issues?
Got it. You're going to be doing that at VC Directions later in the year, right?
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the close of the session.
Got it. Adam, tell me, is this something, I mean, you folks obviously solved an interoperability problem. I mean, you addressed an issue in the marketplace. Do you think it's the vendor's problem or the vendor's opportunity?
I think it's probably both, right? We view it obviously as an opportunity, right? Everybody is racing as fast as they can to innovate. I think it's up to the community of vendors to publish the standards, to make their protocols that they might innovate towards available and accessible, right? And then leave it to the market to determine who can adapt to those standards and deliver the experience in a simple way for a customer, right? A great example of where that was successful, right? In the Cisco early days of immersive telepresence, customers kept saying, hey, I want to bring in my traditional video users. I want to have other people participate in that experience. And Cisco eventually listened. And we need the users, the clients, right, to stand up to the vendors and say, I need you to do this, right? I need you to interop or publish your standard, or publish your protocol. I shouldn't call it a standard. And if we can do that, then I think it's up to the vendors to deliver on those platforms.
Got it. Tom, you agree with Adam on this?
Absolutely. In fact, I also want to validate the comments that Carl made. I think that putting on my VCIG board member hat, the power of community voice in the industry, representing customers, weighs greatly on all the manufacturers. Manufacturers do listen, and voting with your wallet share does drive decisions as to where R&D investments get made. With respect to interoperability, it is the responsibility of both the customer and the manufacturer. Larger manufacturers like Cisco spend tremendous amount of research and development dollars, not only looking at new standards-based innovations going forward, but also making sure that those innovations are backward compatible. And that is really a cost of doing business if we really want to be a player in this market and service the customer's needs for backward and forward compatibility.
Got it. Well, I observed last week one of the largest manufacturers in our industry, I arguably has not developed one thing of their own ever. They've acquired all that technology. So maybe some of it is we invest the dollars to it internally. Maybe others just be business-wise and find the young emerging companies and acquire them quickly, which was, hell, that's how Polygon got in the video business to start with, right, Ira?
Absolutely. Now, you bring up a great point here. This doesn't only mean innovation, it means partnerships. It means creative business model. When service provider X sells through channel partners and partners with some of the vendors, that service provider can bring interop to a huge audience, right, that didn't have access to it before. So we take one company's technology, we make it accessible, and it's also more efficient. Instead of 50 companies working on interop, we have a handful of centralized players doing it, and we're seeing that today. That's one of the biggest draws of the video calling services or of the managed service providers. They're taking on the burden of deploying the technology that solves the problem. It's not just innovating and not always acquiring. Often it's partnering.
Well, as a user, what we've said in the VCIG meetings over and over and over, folks, if you're a user, an end user, if you're in charge, you represent your firm in this space, you'll hear this till ad nauseum. You've got to have a strategy for dealing with interoperability. And part of your strategy and your mission statement is about that balance between innovation and access. And maybe it's like Joe said, we move at this speed for our Chevron internal calls, and we have a different policy and strategy where we're going B2B outside the organization. Is that what you folks have done, Joe, with your
Yes,
strategy?
Sir. Yes, sir. That really would very accurately sum it up.
Okay. Well, let me ask this question. What if somebody says in this session, well, I think I'll just stand by and wait to see what happens for a while, because I really don't want to get inside there and get on that kind of scary bleeding edge, or I don't want to be on the edge of the bleeding edge, that kind of thing. I mean, you think that's healthy? I mean, can a firm afford to do that? Just wait until somebody else makes a decision for them in the marketplace? Ira?
Yeah, I believe that there's something to be said for taking it slowly and cautiously and making the decisions you need to make. You don't need every feature the week it comes out. You need features that empower access, empower ease of use, empower adoption. Those are major plays. But I can tell you, if you don't have H.265 support throughout your entire environment with interop to everybody within 2 months of it coming out, I don't believe a lot of business will be lost around that. You got to make right decisions there. That's really what it is.
Got it. Well, you're in the cloud business, right, Adam? Is that the right solution for our users, some of our users, all of our users?
Well, we're in the software business, right? And we enable a lot of cloud providers. And as the dialogue already kind of went into this direction, right? Cloud is a consumption choice. It's a model. It's not necessarily a solution. The difference historically is that there hasn't been an opportunity for a client to get the, let's call it, interoperable solution they wanted with the flexible choice of consumption, right? Meaning, hey, maybe I want the exact same experience in the cloud. Maybe I want it on-prem. Maybe I want it in a hybrid solution. Going to Joe's point, I shouldn't have to care from a client standpoint, how I have to consume the technology in order to get the capability that I desire. If I've got an IT organization, a staff, and a data center strategy, and an operational team, I probably want to leverage my MPLS backbone and do all that media right there on a private cloud deployment, right? Or maybe that's too burdensome, and I don't have the staff or the budget or the wherewithal or care to do it, and I want to outsource that to the cloud. So I think the cloud can be the right solution, but it's certainly not the only solution.
So we would read this question: is cloud the right solution? But we could say the cloud is a fill in the blank can be a right solution, right, Tom?
I would agree. I think it's what's right for the customer at the time they need it. It should be that just like what kind of device you get to communicate on, IT should have an array of choices, whether it's cloud, hybrid, or enterprise, or a combination of all of the above, when their business needs it. And that's the direction we've taken with Cisco, is that as we look at strategies for deployment, we're not trying to fence customers into one direction. You should be able to have a cloud solution if cloud makes sense, or a cloud hybrid, or a pure enterprise, or all of the above at different times of need in your business. So,
Joe, is that the way you do it? Joe?
The first part, though, if I was in Joe's shoes, right, is that today, and I'll just pick on audio conferencing as an example, you force the user to determine when they're going to cloud and when they're staying on premise, right? If I'm on premise, I pick up my call manager, I place a call, maybe I hit the conference button and add another user. Or I have an intercall bridge, right, and I have to decide to use that, right? And the key for a proper cloud deployment, at least in my opinion, is that it should be blind to the user, right? I should have a capability that just knows whether it needs to be a premise, deployed asset or resource, or when I need to burst out to the cloud because I'm asking for a secure solution that needs to be federated, or I'm asking for capacity that my data center no longer has. That's something that should happen automatically and seamlessly to the experience and to the user. I'd be curious from Joe's perspective on that.
Yeah, Joe, what do you think?
We have evaluated various cloud solutions, and we think there is some value to it. I can tell you that's not what we do now. Of course, it's technology. What we do now, what we do today, could look very different next week. and I think that goes for any organization. It kind of goes again back to what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve consistency. Now, one of the things I know this organization is very, very keen on is security. There's a lot of leery aspects to the cloud in terms of security. I mean, how many times do we have to hear about Target, things of that nature? So when things leave our network, my previous life with another company was the exact same way. Even my life in higher education, they still had things like HIPAA. You got the HIPAA laws, things of that nature. Sarbanes-Oxley. You've got issues when you go to clouds, and most of the issues that I'm familiar with, not just the quality, is security. So
it's interesting you say that, Joe. It's interesting you say that because as I've been tracking new entrants into our industry, a preponderance of new entrants in this space, in our space, are security firms that provide security for cloud services. It's been amazing to watch those companies get in the industry. So while I agree there might be some concern there, I think the market is responding and addressing it very quickly because there is opportunity there. Because really what we've said is there's opportunity on the bleeding edge, right? There's opportunity in ubiquity. There's opportunity in making it available to everybody.
But
so,
JD, if I can jump in, part of the challenge here is not just a technical one. Look at this discussion we've had here. We started off that Interop was about connections. Then we went to maintaining quality. Then we talked about the consumption model and how great OpEx is to help with that. Then the deployment model, we talked about cloud. Then we went into usability, because if they can't access it, they can't interop. Now security. So to a point, this whole interop discussion is like an ever-growing fog. It means more the more you talk about it, and that's a challenge for both the end users and the vendors. So I believe we're starting to lock down that you have to get involved, you have to test it, you have to maintain it, but not necessarily do it all yourself, right? And I look here, if you look at what Carl's company's doing, iRobot, they didn't develop their own codec. They didn't start at baseline and say, we are going to try to figure all this out. They partner. Partnerships solve a lot of that. So I guess, I just don't want to forget that we're getting very technical. A lot of this, you don't have to deal with it. Leave the experts to the problem and they're solving it, but you just have to, beware what you buy.
Well, beware what you buy and have the strategy to understand internally, externally, how you're going to deal with it and how you're going to deal with innovation. Absolutely. All right. So we're going to segue a little bit here. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. We're going to come back to you, our panelists, in a moment. Can you think about maybe 2 or 3 sentences about what thought, what focus you'd like to leave our audience with relative to interoperability? If you'll do that, we'll come back to you in a minute. Right now, Carl, I'd like to invite you to jump in here and have a couple of words, sir.
Great. Thanks very much, JD. So I was right, actually. It is a fantastic session. So it's a really great dialogue. I hope everybody's enjoying this. So I want to talk about a couple of upcoming events to help those of you that are users of visual collaboration, where we're trying to educate you and whatnot. So we have a session coming up, another one of these VCIG live sessions that's a follow-up to InfoComm. So hopefully many of you get a chance to attend InfoComm and see a lot of the leading visual collaboration solutions and other UC applications that'll be on display there. If you don't, then please register and attend this VCIG live session. We're going to go over all the highlights from that show. So if you're not able to actually attend, we'll give you sort of what the best of the best is there and summarize that in this event. We also have, for those of you that are trying to educate yourselves, look at where this panel's gone today. Everything from interoperability and what makes it possible, where are the standards, setting base level security, cloud solutions, what's right. So we're constantly having programs to help educate people. And these interest groups, we encourage you to join. We've got a few coming up in May on technology and engineering and distance learning. Please take advantage of those. Also want to talk real briefly about some other programs, and probably most importantly, our VC Direction Summit. We think this is a real important opportunity for users to take control and aggregate their voices to let vendors know where they want to go in terms of interoperability. What are the features that are most important to you? So this VC Direction Summit will be held in August. And right now, if you go to the VCI Group website, the URL is here on the screen, but submit your top 2 issues. What are you trying to get to work between different platforms? What's important to your organization? And just give us your top 2. And we're going to be putting these all together and then sorting them based on the numbers of responses we hear and creating a top 100 list of interop issues to present to the leading vendors that are out there. So we'll also be doing these presentations at the VC Direction Summit and have a lot of great presentations from vendors there as well. So it's a super event. We also will be providing training as a part of that event. And we have a couple of classes that in interoperability, and we'll be doing some big education around interoperability there, where we look at the top 10 or 12 leading vendors of UC and actually in a couple of hours take you through what's possible to get these solutions to work together today. How do you make your Polycom and your Cisco talk with other applications you have using their bridge technology, cloud solutions, whatever. But it's a great way to sort of jumpstart what's possible for those of you that are looking to make multiple platforms work together. So we hope to see you at any of these upcoming events. Thanks. Back to you, JD. Thanks,
Carl. And let me just say that I don't know anyone else doing visual communications interoperability classes other than the VCIG group. And if you're not a member, you might want to look into it, get to our site and see the other kind of benefits besides just training, information, keeping you up to date on our technology and the industry. That all takes place if you're a member of the VCIG group. And I think we have a free membership too in certain cases, so the price is right. So let's go back to our panelists. I asked you to maybe put 2 or 3 sentences together. Can you start there? Let me ask Joe, can you first tell us what you'd like to leave the audience with, Joe, relative to interoperability?
Well, my dropout was planned to prove the point that, we just want it to work.
Okay.
I'd also like to leave you with, there's no magic bullet. It's going to be companies. And, one of the other things is about the goal of a company trying to interop is going to sway with what they got to pay.
Got it. Tom, what do you say?
I'm going to sort of piggyback off of comments that Ira made. I think it's important that you pick the company that you do business with because of all the issues we discussed here today. Security, any kind of appliance, infrastructure, network. So when you vote with your dollars, consider the history of the company that you're doing business with. If you're buying a piece part player's solution, is it going to be extensible going forward? Does it really carry through the rest of your platform strategy?
Okay. Adam.
I'll get that mute going. I would just comment that past performance is not indicative of future results, right? So when you're looking at how to solve the interoperability challenge, I would think of it as a bigger picture, right? What's really driving the market here is actually the panacea of what we all had hoped for the last 20 years, which is massive adoption of video conferencing, and it's really scale of the desktop that's making that happen. And the big challenge that you're going to run into if you're an end user is, how do I architect my network to support that kind of volume of calls at scale? And so the solution that you pick, has to fit into a data center strategy, has to fit into a cloud strategy, and has to have a very intelligent way of optimizing the bandwidth over the wide area network. If you don't do that, then you can't deploy it anyway, because you won't be able to afford to have all those conversations. So we think we've got a piece of that licked, but we'll see.
Well, Ira, I don't think you've got a dog in either of those fights, but why don't you recap for us what you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, when I work with clients, I try to help them understand that interop is a marathon and is not a sprint, right? You need to walk forward and not run forward as you deal with these issues, and you have to keep investing in it. You have to invest by keeping your solutions up to date, making sure your partners are maintaining their expertise, and you got to keep your users up to date about giving them the best tools and methodologies to communicate. But you really have to accept, and this is maybe the most important thing, that perfect interop is not possible, because somebody will come out with something else that makes them differentiate and gives a new power feature that you won't be able to access someday. And that's okay. You should walk forward, do your communications, make choices that you make every day to communicate well, and accept the fact that interop is about compromise. And that's okay.
Well said. Carl, if you go to the last slide, let's wrap this puppy up. Again, we are the VCI, Video Collaboration, Video Communications, Video Conferencing Group. And if you're a member, you get access to these kinds of webinars. You also get access to training, a list that connects you with thousands and thousands of other users around the world. So if you've not joined, please go to our website, take a look. As I said, the price is right, certainly for the first year. And we've got a number of events that Carl went over. And thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to having some more of you later in the year. Carl, thanks again for being our host. Take care all. Be well. Have a good day. Bye-bye.